Nobody solved it. Not the doctoral candidate who had spent 6 months circling it. Not the visiting professor from MIT who had looked at it for an afternoon and quietly changed the subject at dinner. Not Marcus Elijah Drummond himself, who had written it on that blackboard 14 years ago and left it there the way you leave a door open for someone who never comes home. Monday morning. The equation was solved. White chalk on a blackboard, no name, no notes, no explanation. Just the answer, clean and complete, written by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had no interest in being known for doing it. Drummond stood in front of that blackboard for 11 minutes without moving. Not because the solution was wrong, because it was right. And because the approach, the notation, the way the mind behind it moved through the problem, he had seen it before, in a notebook that belonged to someone who had been dead for 19 years. And on the chalk ledge, a carpenter's pencil, the flat kind. The kind nobody in a mathematics department has any reason to own. Marcus Elijah Drummond had been teaching mathematics at Weston University for 22 years. He had published 31 papers. He had been cited in over 400 academic journals across 12 countries. He had delivered keynote lectures at Cambridge, at the Sorbonne, at conferences where the audience was composed entirely of people who had spent their lives building the architecture of abstract thought. His office had 2 chairs. Nobody had ever sat in the second one. He ate lunch at the same corner table in the faculty cafeteria every day. Same seat, same position. His back to the window facing the door but never looking at it. Not because he was watching for someone, because 22 years ago he had chosen that seat, and he was not the kind of man who reconsidered decisions that did not require reconsideration. The other professors had stopped inviting him to sit with them sometime around 2009. Not because he had been rude, because he had said no with such consistent precision that the asking itself had started to feel unnecessary. He was brilliant in the way that made rooms quieter when he spoke, not louder, quieter. Students described his lectures the way you describe weather you respect but do not enjoy. Clear, cold, accurate. He never praised anyone. He never raised his voice. He simply expected the work to be correct, and when it was not, he returned it without comment and waited for the corrected version the way you wait for a bus that is running late, without frustration, without surprise. Just the steady certainty that it would arrive eventually because arriving was what it was supposed to do. He evaluated people the way he evaluated proofs. By what they produced, by the rigor of the thinking, by whether the structure held under pressure. He did not care where they came from. He did not care what they wore, or who their parents were, or what neighborhood they had grown up in. He cared whether the work was sound. That was it. It was the most honest thing about him. It was also the thing that had cost him the most. Every fall semester, first day of his advanced topics seminar, Drummond walked into room 307 and wrote the same equation on the blackboard. He had been writing it for 14 years. It was not from his research. It was not from any textbook. It was a problem he had constructed himself in the winter of 2006, when a student had sat in the front row of that same room and looked at a different version of it and said 5 words that Drummond had never been able to forget. I think I see it. Not I solved it. Not I have the proof. Just I think I see it. Said quietly, almost to himself, the way someone says something when they are not performing understanding but actually arriving at it in real time. The way a person sounds when they are watching a structure reveal itself inside their own mind and are surprised by the clarity of it. The student's name was Elijah. He was 19 years old from the south side of Chicago, and he was on a full scholarship that he had earned through an entrance examination that the admissions committee had scored twice because the first score did not seem possible for a student from a public school with a math department that had not been fully funded in over a decade. Drummond had recognized it immediately. Not effort. Not discipline, something rarer and harder to teach. Intuition, the ability to look at a structure and see the pattern before the proof existed. The ability to move through mathematics, not step by step but in leaps. The kind of mind that arrives at the answer and then builds the bridge back to show you how it got there. He had seen gifted students before. Plenty of them. Students who worked hard and produced clean results and went on to solid careers. Elijah was different. Elijah was the kind of student a professor waits an entire career to find and sometimes never does. Elijah left at the end of his first year. No explanation, no conversation, just a withdrawal form processed through the registrar's office on a Tuesday in May. Drummond found out the way you find out things at a university, through paperwork, through absence, through the sudden quiet of a seat in the front row that had been occupied every class for 9 months and was now empty. He sent one email. He wrote it the way he wrote everything. Precisely. Without sentiment, without asking why. You are making a mistake that mathematics will not forgive. The kind of sentence a man writes when he believes talent is the highest form of responsibility and walking away from it is the highest form of waste. Elijah never responded. They never spoke again. Drummond wrote the equation on the board every semester after that. He told himself it was pedagogical, a challenge for advanced students, an unsolved problem to remind them that mathematics still had open doors. He told himself this, the way you tell yourself things, when the real reason is something you are not ready to say out loud. The real reason was simpler and worse. He wrote it because Elijah had almost seen the answer. And Drummond had spent 14 years waiting for someone else to see it the way Elijah had. Nobody did. None of the awards fixed it. None of the citations. None of the published papers or the keynote invitations or the particular kind of respect that accumulates around a man who has been right about difficult things for a very long time. None of it had fixed the one thing that had been broken since 2006. He had lost the most gifted mind he had ever encountered. And he had not once asked why it left. The night janitor on the 3rd floor started 2 years ago. Drummond had never spoken to him. He had never looked at him long enough to notice anything about him except that the hallways were clean in the mornings, and the chalk on the ledge was always dry, and the chairs in room 307 were pushed back into their rows with a neatness that went slightly beyond what the job required. He had noticed that last detail once and thought nothing of it. Some people were simply precise. He understood that better than most. He did not know the janitor's name. He did not know his face. He did not know that every night after the mopping was done and the trash emptied and the lights in the hallway turned off, one by one, a man stood alone in room 307 and looked at the equation on the blackboard for a very long time, before turning off the last light and leaving. Solomon Terrence Hayes was 37 years old. He worked the night shift at Weston University Monday through Friday 9 in the evening until 5 in the morning. He was responsible for the 3rd floor, the mathematics department. He had gotten the job through a standard posting on a workforce website 2 years ago. He had not known when he applied that it was the same university. He had recognized the name when he walked in for the interview. He had not said anything. Before Weston, he had worked in a warehouse on the west side for 3 years, moving boxes of things other people had ordered to places other people would open them. Before that, construction, framing houses in subdivisions on the far edge of the suburbs where the lots were still being carved out of old farmland. Before that, a car wash on Halstead for 11 months. Before that, another warehouse. The jobs had a sameness to them that was not about the work itself, but about the position they occupied in the world. Work that kept things running. Work that nobody saw unless it stopped. He did not complain about this. He was not bitter about it. He was something quieter than bitter. He was a man who had learned a long time ago that the world sorts people into categories early and does not revisit the sorting unless something forces it to. He mopped the way some people think. Methodically. In rows. Each pass of the mop slightly overlapping the last, the way you lay shingles on a roof so the water has nowhere to go but down and off. His supervisor had noted once in a performance review that Solomon's floors were consistently the cleanest in the building. Solomon had not responded to the compliment. It was not a compliment to him. It was simply the standard. He cleaned room 307 last, always last. He had arranged his route that way without telling anyone why. The other rooms were work. Room 307 was something else. He emptied the trash. He wiped down the desk surfaces. He straightened the chairs. He checked the chalk ledge and turned the pieces so the dry sides faced up. He did this every night with the particular attention of someone who understood that small maintenance prevented larger failure. The same principle applied to buildings, to tools, to roads, to the human body. His father had taught him that, not in words. In the way his father's hands moved over materials, the way he checked a joint twice, the way he stored a tool. Every night after the cleaning was finished, Solomon stood in front of the blackboard. The equation was always there. Drummond wrote it fresh at the start of each semester, but it never really changed. The structure was the same. The question it asked was the same. Solomon looked at it the way you look at something that has been talking to you in a language you have spent years learning to hear. He did not touch the board. He did not pick up the chalk. He just looked. Sometimes for 2 minutes, sometimes for 10. Then he turned off the light and closed the door and pushed his cart to the elevator and finished his shift and went home. In his left breast pocket always a carpenter's pencil, the flat kind. The kind used for marking wood on job sites and drawing cut lines on 2x4s. The kind that leaves a wide, unmistakable mark. It had belonged to his father. Not the pencil itself, the type. His father had always carried one. Solomon had bought this one at a hardware store on Ashland Avenue 6 years ago because the weight of it in his pocket felt like the right weight, like something was where it was supposed to be. Nobody at Weston knew he carried it. Nobody at Weston knew anything about him except that the floors were clean and the trash was emptied and the 3rd floor was taken care of. He was invisible in the way that people who clean buildings are invisible. Not hated, not avoided, simply not seen. Students walked past him in the hallway with their $400 jackets and their laptop bags and their conversations about things that mattered to them, and Solomon moved his cart to the side and let them pass, and neither party acknowledged the other because acknowledging the other was not part of the arrangement. He went to his mother's apartment on the south side every Sunday afternoon. Loretta Hayes lived in a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that had been adequately maintained but never improved. She was 61, retired. She had been a nurse for 28 years at a clinic on the south side that served the neighborhood the way a single candle serves a room. Not enough. But what was there? Solomon brought food he had cooked himself. He set it on the kitchen table. He sat across from her. They did not talk much. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that exists between people who have already said the hardest things and now simply sit in the space those words left behind. She had lost her son. He had lost his father. The same person. The grief had 2 shapes, and they had learned to let both shapes exist in the same kitchen without asking either one to be smaller than it was. In Loretta's bedroom closet on the highest shelf, there was a shoebox. Old. The corners soft from years. Solomon knew it was there. He had always known it was there. He had not opened it in a very long time. Inside were notebooks, 3 of them, filled with handwriting and flat pencil marks, mathematics, diagrams, proofs that started and started again. Pages where someone had been thinking out loud with a pencil and had not stopped thinking until the page ran out. Solomon knew whose handwriting it was. He knew what the notebooks contained. He knew that the mind that had filled them had once sat in a room very much like room 307 inches, a chair very much like the ones he straightened every night, and had looked at a blackboard and said something that had made a professor stop mid-sentence. He did not talk about this. He did not talk about any of it. He mopped the floors and emptied the trash and stood in front of the equation and went home. Elijah Terrence Hayes had grown up on the same block where Loretta still lived. His father, Solomon's grandfather, had been a carpenter, the real kind, the kind who could look at a piece of wood and know what it wanted to become before he made the first cut. He had a workshop behind the house, small, organized with the precision of a man who believed that every tool had a place and every place had a reason. Elijah used to sit in that workshop as a child and watch his father work, the same way Solomon would later sit and watch Elijah, the same quiet, the same attention, a boy learning not a skill but a way of seeing, that the world was made of structures, that structures could be understood, that understanding them was a form of respect. Elijah carried a carpenter's pencil because his father carried one. He wrote his math homework with it in grade school. He wrote his scholarship application essays with it. He wrote his first university-level proofs with it in the front row of room 307 at Weston University, where a professor named Marcus Elijah Drummond looked at his work and saw something he had not seen in 20 years of teaching, not effort, not training. A mind that moved through mathematics the way water moves through a landscape, finding the path before anyone had drawn the map. Elijah was 19 when he arrived at Weston. He was 19 when Loretta was diagnosed with lupus, severe, The kind that required daily management, weekly clinic visits, medication that insurance covered partially and reality covered not at all. She was 42. A nurse who had spent 3 decades taking care of other people's bodies. Her own body had decided in the particular cruelty of autoimmune disease to turn against itself. Elijah did not tell Drummond. He did not tell anyone at the university. He sat in the front row every class for the rest of the semester and did the work and said nothing about the fact that every evening he called his mother and listened to her describe symptoms she was trying to minimize and needs she was trying not to name. At the end of his first year, he made the decision. He did not make it easily. He did not make it quickly. He made it the way his father made cuts. By looking at the material and understanding what it could hold and what it could not, Loretta could not manage alone. There was no one else. His father was dead. His sister was 16. He withdrew. He packed his bag. He took his notebooks and his carpenter's pencil, and he left Weston University on a Tuesday morning in May and took the bus back to the South Side. Drummond's email arrived that evening. "You are making a mistake that mathematics will not forgive." 8 words sent by a man who had never once asked what was happening in the life of the student he claimed to value most. 8 words that assumed the only reason someone leaves is that they do not care enough to stay. Elijah read the email. He did not respond, not because he was angry, because there was nothing to say to someone who had already decided what the leaving meant without asking what it cost. He went to work. Construction, the same kind of work his father had done. Different scale. Commercial framing, long hours, hard labor, the kind of work that asks your body to do things your body was not designed to do for decades. He did it for 8 years. He never stopped doing mathematics. He did it at night, on the backs of carpentry receipts, in the margins of instruction manuals, in the 3 notebooks he kept in a drawer beside his bed. He worked on the same kinds of problems he had worked on at Weston, not because he was trying to finish his degree, not because he thought someone would see the work, because the math was the part of his mind that still belonged to him. The rest belonged to the job and the bills and the medications and the daily logistics of keeping his mother alive and his family intact. He died at a construction site on the west side on a Thursday in November, a scaffolding failure. He was 29 years old. Solomon was 18. Drummond did not know. Nobody at Weston knew. Elijah Hayes had been a name on a withdrawal form filed 19 years ago, a file in a registrar's cabinet, a student who had come and gone and left behind nothing except an empty seat, and a professor who wrote the same equation on a blackboard every September and told himself it was for the students. Drummond lost the most gifted student he had ever taught. He spent 19 years believing it was because Elijah did not care enough about the work. He was wrong. Elijah had cared about something more. And the proof of that was not in any journal or any lecture hall. It was in a shoebox on the top shelf of a closet in a 2-bedroom apartment on the South Side, and in a carpenter's pencil in the breast pocket of a night janitor who stood in front of that equation every night and understood it completely and had never once picked up the chalk. Solomon opened the shoebox for the first time a year after his father died. He was 19. He was cleaning out the closet because Loretta had asked him to reorganize the shelves, and he had found the box behind a stack of old linens that had not been moved in years. He opened it without knowing what was inside. 3 notebooks, a folded acceptance letter from Weston University, a student ID card with his father's face on it, younger than Solomon had ever seen him, and the handwriting, page after page of it, in flat pencil marks. The same wide strokes that Solomon had watched his father use to mark 2x4s on job sites. The same pencil, the same hand, but instead of cut lines and measurements there were equations, diagrams, proofs. Solomon did not understand any of it, not a single line. He sat on the floor of his mother's bedroom and turned the pages one by one and looked at the shapes of the letters and the numbers and the symbols that meant nothing to him and felt something he could not name. It was not grief exactly. It was the sensation of discovering that someone you thought you knew had a room inside them you had never entered. He closed the box. He put it back on the shelf. He did not tell Loretta he had opened it. She knew the notebooks were there. She had never opened them either. The box sat between them the way some things sit between people who love each other, known unspoken, heavy with everything it contains. 6 months later, Solomon went to the public library on 63rd Street and checked out an introductory algebra textbook. He did not know why he did this. He told himself he was curious. He told himself it was nothing. It was not nothing. It was the beginning of something that would take him 18 years and was still not finished. He taught himself mathematics the way you teach yourself a dead parent's language. Slowly, painfully, one word at a time, with no teacher and no classroom and no one to tell him whether he was getting it right. He bought used textbooks from a thrift store on Cottage Grove, $1 each, sometimes $2. He read them at night after his shifts. Warehouse shifts, construction shifts, car wash shifts. Whatever the day had been, the night was mathematics. He got things wrong constantly. He wrote proofs that collapsed. He spent 3 days on a single page of his father's notebook and understood nothing. He spent a week on the same page and understood one line. He spent a month and understood the paragraph. The feeling when it came was not triumph. It was something closer to hearing a voice he had not heard in years, like sitting down across from his father at a table in a room that existed only on paper and only for the duration of the understanding. That was what the mathematics was. It was not a career. It was not ambition. It was a form of mourning that had no end date. It was the only way Solomon had found to sit in the same room as his father again. Nobody knew. Not Loretta, not his co-workers, not the supervisors at the various jobs who signed his timesheets and noted his reliability and never once asked what he did with his evenings. He existed in 2 worlds that never touched. During the day, he moved boxes or framed walls or washed cars or mopped floors. At night, he sat alone in a small apartment and worked through algebraic topology in a notebook that no one would ever read. When the job posting at Weston appeared on a workforce website, Solomon applied the way he applied to everything: resume, references, interview. He did not know when he submitted the application that it was the same university. He recognized the name when the interview confirmation email came through. Weston University, Chicago. He sat with that for a long time. He went to the interview. He got the job. He started on a Monday. He was assigned to the 3rd floor. The mathematics department. The first night he cleaned room 307, he saw the equation on the blackboard. He recognized the structure. Not because he had seen this specific problem before. Because he had spent 18 years learning the language it was written in. He stood in front of it and read it the way you read a sentence in a book. Not struggling for meaning, just receiving it. He did not pick up the chalk. He turned off the light. He left. He came back the next night. And the next. And every night after that for 2 years, he cleaned the room and stood in front of the equation and thought about it. Not frantically. Not desperately. The way his father had thought about wood. Slowly. By feel. By the kind of understanding that comes not from speed but from time spent with the material. The solution arrived the way solutions arrive when they are ready. Not all at once. In pieces, over months. He saw the first piece on a bus ride home. He saw the second piece while mopping a hallway on a Tuesday. He saw the third piece in the middle of the night in his apartment, sitting at a desk with his father's notebook open beside him. He had the complete solution 3 months before he wrote it on the board. He was sure of it. He had checked it the way his grandfather had checked joints, twice, 3 times, until the structure held from every angle. He did not write it because writing it meant stepping into a room he had not been invited into. The room of people who solve things, the room of people whose minds are acknowledged. He was a janitor. His hands were supposed to hold a mop. The world had been very clear about that for a very long time. It was a Friday night. Late. The campus was the version of itself that only existed after midnight. Empty walkways. Security lights making long shadows across the quad. The particular quiet of a place built for 1,000 voices operating in the absence of all of them. Solomon finished room 307 the way he always finished it. Trash emptied, surfaces wiped. Chairs in rows, chalk turned dry side up on the ledge. He stood with his hand on the light switch and looked at the blackboard. He had looked at this equation for 2 years. He had thought about it on the bus home at 5 in the morning when the city was still dark and the seats were empty and the engine noise was the only sound. He had thought about it in the shower. He had thought about it lying in bed in his apartment, staring at the ceiling while the radiator clicked. He had thought about it sitting across from his mother on Sunday afternoons while she drank her tea, and neither of them spoke. He knew the solution. He had known it for 3 months, the complete proof, every step. He had worked it out in his head first, the way his father used to measure a cut by eye before picking up the saw. Then he had written it in his notebook at home, checked it again, taken it apart and rebuilt it from a different angle. It held. From every direction it held. He had not written it on the board because writing it on the board meant something he was not sure he was ready to mean. It meant stepping across a line that had been drawn for him a long time ago. The line between the people who solve things and the people who clean the rooms where things get solved. He had been on one side of that line his entire adult life. The world had put him there, and he had stayed because staying was simpler than explaining why he should be somewhere else. If he wrote it, and the solution was wrong, he was the janitor who had drawn on the blackboard like a child pretending to be a teacher. They would find out. They would check the cameras. He would lose the job. The job was not much, but it was what he had. If he wrote it and the solution was right, the questions would be worse. How does a night janitor with no degree solve a problem that an entire mathematics department could not touch for 14 years? The answer to that question would require telling a story he had never told anyone. About his father. About the notebooks. About 18 years of teaching himself in the dark. He was not sure he wanted that story in anyone else's hands. He stood at the light switch. The hallway behind him was empty. The building was silent in the way buildings are silent when they are holding their breath. He reached into his breast pocket and took out the carpenter's pencil. Held it. The flat edges against his fingers. The weight of it. The particular way it sat in his hand that was different from any other pencil or pen he had ever held. This pencil did not write on blackboards. It wrote on wood, on paper, on the backs of receipts in a kitchen on the south side. It was not built for this surface. He put it down on the chalk ledge. Gently. The way you set something down when you are not leaving it behind but placing it exactly where it needs to be. He picked up a piece of chalk. White. Ordinary. The kind that costs nothing and breaks if you press too hard. He held it the way his father held the pencil. Between the first 2 fingers and the thumb. Close to the tip. The grip of someone who has done precise work for a long time. He looked at the equation one more time. Not reading it, just looking at it the way you look at a door before you walk through it. Knowing what is on the other side. Knowing you cannot unknow it once you cross. He started writing. The chalk moved across the black surface in lines that were clean and certain. No hesitation. No corrections. The proof unfolded the way it had unfolded in his mind 3 months ago, and in his notebook 2 months ago, and in the quiet of every night since. He did not use the standard approach. He used the one his father would have used. The one that saw the geometry underneath the algebra and cut through the long way around by going straight to the structure. The room was silent except for the sound of chalk on slate. A sound that belonged to this room. That had belonged to this room for decades. Made now by hands that were supposed to hold a mop. He wrote the solution in 11 minutes. It had taken him 19 years to decide to pick up the chalk. When he finished, he set the chalk down on the ledge, next to the carpenter's pencil. He did not sign anything. He did not write his name. He stepped back and looked at the board the way his father used to step back and look at a finished piece of furniture, checking the lines, checking the joints, making sure it held. It held. He turned off the light. He closed the door. He pushed his cart to the elevator and finished his shift and went home. The carpenter's pencil stayed on the ledge. He had not meant to leave it. He had not meant not to. It was just there, the way a man's whole history can be in a room without anyone knowing whose it is. Drummond arrived at room 307 at 7:43 on Monday morning. He carried his briefcase in his left hand and his coffee in his right, and he pushed the door open with his shoulder the way he had pushed it open every Monday for 22 years. He saw the blackboard before he saw anything else. The way you see a light that has been turned on in a room you expected to be dark. The solution was there, all of it, covering the right third of the board in handwriting that was not his and was not any student's he recognized. Clean lines, no erasures, The proof moved from top to bottom with the economy of someone who had not been figuring it out on the board but transcribing something already complete. He set his briefcase down on the desk. Slowly. The coffee he placed beside it without looking at it. He walked to the board. The approach was wrong. Not wrong as in incorrect. Wrong as in unexpected. The standard method for this class of problems involved algebraic topology applied through a series of functorial mappings that built the proof layer by layer over dozens of pages. This solution did not do that. This solution used geometric intuition to bypass the algebraic scaffolding entirely. It went straight to the underlying structure and proved it from there. In 11 lines, it was not the way anyone in his department would have done it. It was not the way anyone trained in the conventional methods would have thought to do it. It was the way someone who saw mathematics as shapes rather than symbols would do it. Someone who understood the architecture of a problem before they understood the language it was written in. Drummond had seen this before. Once. 19 years ago. In a notebook left behind in a research lab by a student who had written his proofs with a flat pencil and handwriting that did not look like any other student's handwriting because it had been learned not in a classroom but in a carpenter's workshop. His eyes moved down to the chalk ledge. A carpenter's pencil. Flat. The kind used on construction sites. Sitting on the ledge beside a piece of white chalk, the way two languages sit beside each other on a page. Drummond did not move for a long time. He stood in front of that board with his hands at his sides and something happening inside his chest that he did not have a word for. It was not excitement. It was not satisfaction. It was the feeling of a door opening that you had believed was sealed shut. He canceled his morning class. He sent the email from his phone while still standing in room 307. A single line. Class canceled. No reason given. He had never canceled a class in 22 years. He went to his office. He closed the door. He sat in his chair and did not open his computer and did not look at his phone and did not do any of the things he did every morning in the precise order he had done them for 2 decades. He sat still. For the first time in 30 years of teaching, Marcus Elijah Drummond was in front of a problem he could not solve with his mind. This one required something else, something he had not used in a very long time. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Underneath the files and the old syllabi and the things that accumulate in a drawer that no one cleans out because the contents are not important enough to organize and not unimportant enough to discard, there was a notebook. Thin, the cover worn soft. He had kept it for 19 years. He had never shown it to anyone. He had never told anyone it was there. He opened it. The handwriting inside was flat, written with a carpenter's pencil, diagrams, half-finished proofs, the particular notation of a mind that was teaching itself to speak a language it already understood intuitively. He held the notebook open and looked at the Blackboard photograph he had taken on his phone. The handwriting on the board and the handwriting in the notebook were not identical. They were close. The same underlying architecture, the same way of moving through a proof, but the board was more developed, more refined. As though the mind that had written the notebook had kept growing in the 19 years since the notebook was closed. As though Elijah had never stopped. Drummond sat with that for a long time. The possibility that Elijah had not abandoned mathematics, that he had continued, that somewhere in whatever life he had been living since that Tuesday in May he had kept working, that the email Drummond had sent, the one about mathematics not forgiving, had been wrong in every way a sentence can be wrong. He needed to find him. That was the only clear thought. Everything else was noise. He needed to find Elijah Hayes. He went to campus security the next morning. He asked to see the hallway camera footage for the 3rd floor from Friday night. The security officer pulled it up on a monitor in a small office that smelled like old coffee and filing cabinets. The footage was grayscale. Time-stamped. The hallway outside room 307. At 11:22, the night janitor entered the room with his cleaning cart. Gray uniform, work boots. The camera did not show the inside of the room. At 11:51, the janitor exited, cart first. Then the door closed behind him. Nobody else entered room 307 between Friday evening and Monday morning. Drummond asked the question he already knew the answer to. Who is assigned to the 3rd floor night shift? The officer checked a schedule. Solomon Hayes. Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Hayes. Drummond held the printed schedule in his hand and did not speak for a moment. The officer asked if everything was all right. Drummond said yes. He walked back to his office with the paper still in his hand. He sat at his computer. He searched the employee directory. Solomon Terrence Hayes, age 37. Position custodial staff, night shift. No degree listed. Emergency contact Loretta Hayes. Address South Side, Chicago. Hayes, Loretta, South Side. Not Elijah. Elijah's son. Drummond understood it the way you understand something that has been assembling itself inside you for days and finally clicks into place. Not with surprise, with the heavy clarity of something that was always going to be true and had simply been waiting for you to see it. He typed Elijah's name into the search bar. Elijah Terrence Hayes, Chicago. The results were sparse. No academic profile, no professional listing, no social media. A name that had passed through the world without leaving much of a digital trace. The obituary was on the second page of results. A small notice from a South Side community paper. Elijah Terrence Hayes. Died November 14, 2014. Age 29. Construction accident. Survived by his mother Loretta Hayes and his son Solomon Terrence Hayes, age 18, 29 years old. A construction accident. 8 years after leaving Weston University. 8 years after Drummond had written him an email telling him that mathematics would not forgive him for leaving. Drummond read the obituary twice. It was 4 sentences long. 4 sentences for a life that had contained the most extraordinary mathematical mind Drummond had ever encountered. 4 sentences for a man who had left a university to take care of his mother and gone to work with his hands and died on a job site before he turned 30. He closed the laptop. He sat in his office in the dark. The campus was quiet outside his window. He could hear the HVAC system running, the distant sound of someone walking in the hallway below. Ordinary sounds on an ordinary evening, in a building where ordinary things happened to people who had the luxury of ordinary lives. He had spent 19 years angry at a boy for wasting his gift. The boy had spent 8 of those years working construction until his body gave out. He had been 29. Drummond had not known. Drummond had not asked. He put his face in his hands. For the first time and longer than he could remember, Marcus Elijah Drummond did not have a single precise thought. He had only the sound of his own breathing in an empty room and the weight of 19 years of being wrong about everything that mattered. The following night, Drummond was sitting at the desk in room 307 when Solomon pushed the door open with his cart at 9:15. The lights were on. They should not have been on. Solomon saw the man at the desk and stopped. He knew who it was. He had seen Drummond 100 times in the hallways, walking past, never looking. The professor who wrote the equation on the board every semester. The professor who had taught his father. Drummond looked at him. At the gray uniform and the work boots and the cleaning cart with its mop and bucket and spray bottles. At the man standing in the doorway of a room he cleaned every night and who had done something in that room that Drummond's best doctoral candidates had not been able to do in 14 years. Neither of them spoke. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Maybe 6. The kind of silence that is not empty, but full of everything that is about to be said and everything that should have been said a long time ago. Drummond did not ask if Solomon had solved the equation. He did not mention the board or the chalk or the proof. He said the only thing that mattered. Your father was Elijah Hayes. Not a question. Solomon heard it, and something moved through his chest. The particular feeling of being known in a place where you had built your invisibility with care. He set the mop handle against the cart. He did not let go of it immediately. His hand stayed on it for a moment, the way you keep your hand on a railing before you step off the last stair. Yes, sir. Drummond looked at the carpenter's pencil in Solomon's breast pocket. The flat edge, visible above the pocket line. The same kind. Drummond nodded, slightly. The nod of a man confirming something he already knew but needed to see. Tell me about him. Solomon was quiet for a long time. This was the door. If he opened it, everything he had kept sealed for 19 years would be in the room. His father's story. His own story. The notebooks. The years of teaching himself in the dark. The reason he stood in front of that board every night. Everything. If he did not open it, both of them would keep carrying something that was too heavy to carry alone and too old to put down gently. He let go of the mop handle. He came home to take care of my grandmother. She had lupus. There was nobody else. Drummond said nothing. He waited. The way you wait when someone is giving you something that costs them something to give. He worked construction. Framing. Same kind of work his father did. My grandfather. He was good at it. He was good at most things he did with his hands. A pause. Solomon looked at the board, at the equation, at his own handwriting still there from Friday night. He never stopped working on the math. He just did not have a blackboard anymore. He used the back of carpentry receipts, napkins, margins of instruction manuals, anything flat, anything he could write on with that pencil. He worked on it at night after his shifts. Every night. For 8 years. Drummond's hands were on the desk in front of him. They had gone still, the particular stillness of a body absorbing something it is not ready to hold. He died on a job site when I was 18. Scaffolding collapse. He was 29. The room held both of them. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, the campus was dark and quiet in the way it always was at this hour. Drummond spoke. His voice was different from the voice Solomon had heard in the hallways. Smaller, like a room that had always been large and was suddenly aware of its own emptiness. I wrote him one email when he left. I told him mathematics would not forgive him. I should have asked him why he was leaving. Solomon looked at the man across the room. The professor who had taught his father. The man who had kept the equation on the board for 14 years. Who had kept a notebook in his bottom drawer for 19. Who had never once come looking. He would have told you. Solomon's voice was steady. Not angry, not bitter. Just the particular evenness of someone stating a fact they have lived with for a long time. He was waiting for someone to ask. Drummond presented the solution to the department the following Wednesday. He stood in front of the faculty committee in the conference room on the 4th floor with the proof projected on the screen behind him and the name Solomon Hayes written at the top of the first page. Not his own name. Not the department's name. Solomon Hayes. The chair of the committee, a man named Alderton, who had been at Weston for 15 years and had built his reputation on being the person in the room most likely to find the procedural objection, looked at the name and then at Drummond. This person is not affiliated with the university. He is employed by the university. Alderton waited. He is the night custodian on the 3rd floor. The room shifted. Not loudly. The way rooms shift when something has been said that rearranges the assumptions everyone walked in with. Alderton looked at the screen. He looked at the proof. He looked back at Drummond. This is not how we do things. There are protocols, peer review, credentials. We cannot attribute a solution of this significance to someone who has no formal qualification in the field. Drummond stood very still. He had spent 22 years in rooms like this one, evaluating work, evaluating people, deciding who belonged and who did not, based on what they produced and whether the structure held. He had built his entire professional identity on the principle that the work was the only thing that mattered. He had also spent 19 years failing to apply that principle to the one person who needed it most. The solution does not know who wrote it. It only knows whether it is correct. The room was quiet. Drummond looked at Alderton. Alderton looked at the proof on the screen. The proof was correct. Everyone in the room knew the proof was correct. The question had never been about the proof. That Sunday afternoon, Solomon sat at his mother's kitchen table. The same table, the same chairs, the same quiet. But this time, he had the shoebox with him. He had brought it from the closet and set it on the table between the plates. Loretta looked at it. She had not seen it out of the closet since the day she had put it there. 19 years ago, the day after the funeral, she had taken everything that had been in Elijah's drawer and put it in the box, and put the box on the highest shelf, and closed the closet door, and not opened it since. She did not ask why Solomon had brought it. She knew. She had always known the notebooks were in there. She had always known that one day one of them would open the box in front of the other. She had been waiting for Solomon to ask, and Solomon had been waiting for her to speak. And they had both been waiting because neither of them wanted to be the one who made the grief real again by putting it on the table, but it was on the table now. It had always been on the table. They had just been eating around it. Solomon opened the box. He took out the notebooks. He opened the first one and turned it so she could see the pages. He was brilliant, Mama. He was doing things in here that people with decades of training struggle with. And he was doing it on the backs of receipts. Loretta looked at the handwriting, the flat pencil marks, the same marks she had seen on pieces of wood in the workshop when Elijah was a boy. She reached out and touched the page. Not reading it, she could not read mathematics. She was touching her son's handwriting the way you touch something that proves a person was here. She cried. Not the way she had cried at the funeral. That had been the heavy, airless kind. This was different. This was the crying that comes when someone finally sees the thing you have been carrying alone. Not the loss. The life. What he had been before the loss. He was waiting for someone to ask. The words moved through Loretta's mind, the way a sentence moves through a room when it finds the person it was meant for. Solomon had been waiting for her, and she had been waiting for Solomon. Both of them holding a box closed for 19 years because opening it alone felt like too much, and opening it together meant admitting that neither of them had been able to carry it on their own. The kitchen was quiet for a while after that. The same quiet it had always been, but lighter, like a room that had been holding its breath and had finally been allowed to exhale. A week after the faculty meeting, a doctoral candidate named Priya Lakshman stopped Drummond in the hallway outside room 307. She had been working on the equation for 6 months. She had presented 3 partial approaches in seminar, each one rejected by Drummond, with the specific silence that meant the work was not sufficient. She had gone home and worked harder and come back and tried again. She was 26 years old, and she was serious about mathematics in the way that people are serious about things that have cost them something to choose. Who is Solomon Hayes? Drummond looked at her. He could have given her the department answer, the one that Alderton would have given, a custodial employee, an unusual case, an anomaly being reviewed through proper channels. He did not give her the department answer. He is the night janitor on the 3rd floor, and he is the son of the most naturally gifted mathematician I have ever known. Priya said nothing for a moment. She looked at the door to room 307, the room she sat in 3 times a week, the room someone else cleaned every night. She nodded once and walked away. She did not ask anything else. She did not need to. The answer had already rearranged something in the way she understood the building she walked through every day. Drummond called Solomon into his office on a Thursday evening. Solomon came in his uniform, work boots on the carpet, the cleaning cart parked in the hallway outside. He stood in the doorway the way he stood in every doorway at Weston, at the edge, ready to move out of the way. Sit down. Solomon looked at the second chair, the one that had been across the room against the wall for 22 years. Drummond had moved it. It was at the desk now, across from his own chair. Facing him, Solomon sat. I am not offering you charity. Drummond's voice was careful, precise. The way he spoke when he was saying something he had spent a long time deciding how to say. I am not offering you a degree, or a scholarship, or a position you did not earn. I am offering you a desk and a blackboard. What you do with it is yours. Solomon did not respond immediately. He looked at the desk between them, at the stacks of papers and the coffee mug and the particular order of a workspace that had been maintained by one person for 2 decades. He looked at the chair he was sitting in, the one that had never had anyone in it. He thought about his father, about the notebooks, about 18 years of sitting alone in apartments and reading mathematics by the light of a desk lamp he had bought for $9 at a thrift store, about the line between the people who solve things and the people who clean the rooms, about what it meant to cross that line, about what it cost. I need to think about it. Take whatever time you need. Solomon went to Loretta's apartment that Sunday. He sat at the kitchen table. He told her what Drummond had offered. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, without arranging her face into an expression that would tell him what she thought before she said it. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. She looked at the shoebox on the counter where it had stayed since the week before. Open now. The notebooks visible inside. No longer on the highest shelf. No longer closed. Your father would have wanted you to finish what he started. Her voice had the particular steadiness of a woman who had been thinking about something for a long time and had finally found the right shape for it, but only if you want to finish it for yourself. Solomon looked at her hands. The hands of a nurse who had worked 28 years, the knuckles slightly swollen, the skin thin in the way skin gets when it has been washed 10,000 times in hospital sinks. She had held his father's notebooks without being able to read them. She had kept them for 19 years without knowing what they said. She had done this because they were his, because keeping them was the closest she could get to keeping him. He nodded. He did not quit the janitorial job. He started the research position during the day and kept the night shift for 4 more months. Not because he needed both incomes, because he did not want anyone to say he had been given something. He had earned the desk the way his father had earned the scholarship, through the work, through years of the work. And he was going to walk into that room every morning knowing that the mop and the chalk had both been held by the same hands, and neither one diminished the other. Drummond cleared the papers from the right side of his desk. He moved the second chair into position. He set a box of chalk on the corner nearest to where Solomon would sit. For 22 years, that office had been a room built for one person, one chair used, one mind working, one set of hands writing on the whiteboard behind the desk. The second chair had someone in it. 1 year later, a Friday morning in May, room 307. The chairs were full, every seat taken. Students from the mathematics department, faculty, a few people from other departments who had heard about the lecture and wanted to see it for themselves. In the back row near the door, 2 people who were not affiliated with the university at all. Drummond stood at the front of the room. He was 60 years old. This was his last lecture. He had announced his retirement 3 months earlier with the same precision he had announced everything else in his career. A memo. A date. No ceremony requested. The university had organized this event anyway. A final lecture. An invitation to reflect on 30 years of contribution to the field. They expected him to talk about his research, his publications, the arc of his career. He did not talk about any of those things. He talked about a boy from the south side of Chicago who arrived at Weston University 19 years ago with a scholarship he had earned and a carpenter's pencil in his pocket. He talked about the way that boy looked at mathematics. Not as a system to be learned, but as a landscape to be seen. He talked about the 5 words the boy had said in this room, in this exact spot, on a Tuesday morning in September. I think I see it. He talked about the email he had sent when the boy left. He read it aloud. The full sentence. You are making a mistake that mathematics will not forgive. He let it sit in the room. He did not soften it. He did not explain it away. He let it be what it was. The words of a man who had confused talent with obligation and had never once asked what the leaving had cost. He talked about what he had learned since, that the boy had not left because he did not care about mathematics. He had left because his mother was sick and there was nobody else, that he had gone to work construction and had kept doing mathematics every night on the backs of carpentry receipts with a flat pencil that had belonged to his father, that he had died at 29 on a job site, that he had never stopped working on the problems he had started in this room. It was not a waste. Drummond's voice was steady. The steadiness of a man who has practiced this sentence enough times to say it without breaking. It was a sacrifice, and I was too certain of my own definition of value to recognize it. The room was still. 200 people. No one moved. In the back row, Solomon sat with his hands in his lap. He had chosen that seat, not out of modesty, because the back row was where his father had sat on the first day of his first semester, the same room, the same row. 19 years apart. Beside him, Loretta, she was wearing the coat she wore to things that mattered. The dark one. She held something in her lap. A notebook. The first of the 3. The one with the most pages filled. She had taken it out of the shoebox that morning and carried it in her purse on the train from the south side. It was the first time the notebook had left the apartment. The first time it had been in the same building where it was written. Drummond looked out at the room. His eyes found Solomon, found Loretta, found the notebook in her hands. He stopped speaking. 3 seconds. 4. The silence of a man seeing something he had not expected to see and needing a moment to stay standing in front of it. He continued. He finished the lecture, He set the chalk down on the ledge of the blackboard, and beside the chalk already there placed before the lecture began was a carpenter's pencil. Flat, old, the same kind that had been on that ledge on a Monday morning when the equation was solved. Solomon had come early. He had placed it there without telling anyone. Without making it into a moment, Drummond looked at it. He looked at Solomon. Neither of them spoke. The room began to applaud. Loretta held the notebook against her chest and watched her grandson's professor put down the chalk next to her son's pencil and understood that the two things sitting on that ledge were not objects, they were a conversation. Between a man who had finally learned to ask and a family that had been waiting 19 years for the question. The applause continued. Drummond stood at the front of the room he had taught in for 22 years and received it. Not for the career, not for the publications. For the thing he had gotten wrong and the thing he was trying finally to make right, he understood the difference. He was going to live inside that difference for whatever years he had left. It was not comfortable. It was not supposed to be. It was simply what was true. Some people say Drummond redeemed himself, that the lecture was an act of courage, that naming Elijah in front of 200 people and admitting what he had failed to do was the hardest thing a man of his precision and control could have done. Others say one lecture does not erase 19 years of silence. That Elijah worked construction until his body broke and died at 29, while the man who claimed to value his mind never once picked up the phone. Both arguments hold weight. Neither one is the question that stays with you longest. The question that stays is this. Solomon was not exceptional because he solved the equation. Thousands of people could solve equations. He was exceptional because he decided to pick up the chalk in a world that had already decided his hands were only meant to hold a mop. That decision is available to anyone, in any room, at any time. Most people do not make it, not because they are cruel, because the distance between where they are standing and where the blackboard is has a cost attached to it, and they have quietly decided the cost is not worth paying. There is someone in your life right now whose handwriting you have never read, whose mind you have never asked about, whose gift you have walked past every day without knowing it was there. The chalk is still on the ledge. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe. New stories every week. See you in the next one.